All right, team, we are back in the Fireside PM podcast, and I've got Hannah Clark uh, in the pod. How are you doing today, Hannah?
I'm doing great, Tom. Thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic. It's pretty nice weather in Northern California at the moment. Where are you joining us from?
I'm from the middle of nowhere, Canada, in Winnipeg.
Oh,
It's nice
Winnipeg is
weather here too.
beautiful.
What's that?
You've got like mountains and stuff, right?
They're a little far away from where I am specifically, but you can drive there.
Yeah. Well, Canada's a beautiful country, so
Yeah, it
that's
is.
awesome. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know we're going to talk about PM fatigue with like zigging and zagging and pivoting and agile leadership and all that. But before we get into it, maybe just a little background about yourself.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, my name is Hannah. I'm Hannah Clark. I'm the editor of the productmanager.com and also the host of the Product Manager podcast. And my background has kind of taken me through all kinds of twists and turns. I have background in the tech industry. I've worked as a freelancer and consultant and manager, a bunch of different titles for different startups. Mostly in a content and marketing capacity after I left the tech industry originally. And then I've kind of married sort of my two passions and backgrounds now in my role as the editor of the publication and the podcast host.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit more about the product manager kind of publication and podcast.
Sure. So the product manager is we're a community of product folks. We're really more focused on specifically the challenges that people address during that growth stage of a startup. But we are focused on producing articles, how-to guides, all kinds of resources to help folks get better at their work. A podcast is also focused on the same thing. We have a ton of really interesting guests come on. It's very similar to this. We have interesting conversations for people of all levels in their career. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And we also have a membership that we've just launched as well. So we have a community there that's quite vibrant for those interested.
That's great. How long has it been around, the publication?
So we started it off in 2020. So
Mm-hmm.
we're going on 4 years now. It was late 2020 that we started up. And so, yeah, we're coming on 4 years, seeing some pretty awesome growth and things changing all the time as it is in the product space. But yeah, it's always exciting, always something new.
Yeah, it's great. I feel like now there's more content and people talking about product management as a profession than than before. So I feel like we've kind of reached a new level of critical mass. So that's always fun to see.
Yeah. I've really fallen in love with the space too because I've had such a great opportunity to get to know and develop relationships with people all over the SaaS industry.
Mhm.
UXRs and product leaders and folks who are at the beginning or middle or towards the end of their careers. So yeah, it's been such a fascinating vantage point to kind of get to know this community in its holistic form.
Now, before you and I talked about topics we could hit for this episode, we both kind of rolled our eyes a little bit like, should we talk about AI? And I think we were both like, let's talk about something else.
Zoom out a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. We can't do every episode about Gen AI. So you brought up this notion of like fatigue and burnout that PMs can experience. I'd love for you to describe it a little more because I think even when we were talking about it prior to this show, it was fun to kind of trade perspectives because sometimes I've been on the other side of that, causing a lot of the fatigue. But maybe we could start with how would you describe this phenomena that you've seen?
Sure. So I think that first of all, we'll talk about the origins of it. Sorry. So in its purest state, change fatigue really is kind of this phenomenon that happens in which a team has been kind of directed to change priorities and deprioritize the things that they have currently got on the go or had to adapt to significant changes to their day-to-day or week-over-week schedule on an ongoing basis, to which it's very difficult to kind of recoup that energy and kind of leads to a host of issues that have an impact on individual contributor, but also on the team and also on the
Mhm.
business outcomes. And a lot of this kind of starts with it's all well intentioned, and it kind of begins with this agile mindset that startups tend to start with,
Mhm.
or we've got we start out with a scrappy team, maybe it's just like a couple of guys in a garage or whatever, in which everybody's kind of owning their piece of the puzzle, and that own knowledge is enough to sustain an organization that size, and we can be super agile and we can change things on a dime. But
Mhm.
as the business starts to scale and starts to get larger and the team grows, um, that process, we tend to hold on to that agile mindset, and it's a little bit trickier to apply some of those principles to people management. And that's kind of what leads to the change fatigue that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Now, if I were to play devil's advocate, I could argue that, hey, that agility when we were a few people in a garage is what got us here to maybe our big round of capital raising or whatever. And the last thing we want to do is turn into some fossil
Mhm.
that has annual plans and things like that. And we should retain that agility because we're still figuring things out, yada yada.
Mhm.
How would you what's the other side of that argument? Because I think that there's some truth to that.
I would too. And I think that it's about finding a balance because, of course, we don't want to let go of an agile mindset. But as a business gets larger, agile or agility as a business also looks different. You kind of think of like Clifford the Big Red Dog. Like when he's a little puppy, he can turn on a dime. But when he's bigger, he needs a little bit more room to move around. I don't know if you're familiar with the Clifford the
I
Big
am
Red Dog.
familiar with Clifford, yes.
Yeah. That's maybe the parents and the older folks in the audience will get that. Um, but yeah, as you get a little bit larger as an organization, there needs to be a lot more forethought in terms of what priorities are you going to commit to. They don't have to be priorities that you're going to commit to for time immemorial, but there is a certain outcome that's important to reach before it maybe is wise to turn around. Or maybe needs to be a little bit more of a careful evaluation of the things that you take on in an agile way. So I think it's a little bit about finding a balance of how do we kind of react to market conditions or the priorities for the business or the material realities of the business itself, and then also make sure that we're giving ourselves enough runway to kind of see the things that we have on the go to a state in which we can actually get an outcome from them, learn from them, and then apply those things to the next project rather than turning on a dime all the time.
Yeah, one of the things that I observed in various projects I've worked on over the years is this tension between wanting to provide a pretty kind of stable environment for teams to execute, acknowledging that, hey, there's a lot of switching costs to
Mm.
these pivots. Um, and on the other hand, also wanting to ensure that you're setting up the organization for success, for business success. And it could happen that we spent a lot of time at the end of last year doing all this planning, and then new information surfaces in the first quarter of the year, and either it's like, oh shoot, there was this blind spot we had back in November and now we're figuring this out in February around customer needs,
Mhm.
or the resourcing available, we assumed we were going to get all this headcount and now we're not, or we actually have to cut back. And so you kind of want to keep it real with the team,
Mhm.
but I agree with you, like they're going to be frustrated
Yeah.
because they spent all this time last year with these plans. They're executing on it, and they're going to say, "Wow, you're really pulling the plug on us and now we got to start over. Like, are you serious?"
Mhm.
Have you noticed that kind of difficult dynamic as well?
I have, and I think that an area that I have frequently seen, and I'm not sure in every case whether it is an oversight of the leadership team or whether it is, assuming that the team that you're dealing with, like the individual contributors, don't need to know or what it is. But there seems to be this is an area that's really rife with communication breakdown in which I think it's important for teams who are in the middle of that kind of a pivot to understand the context for why the pivot has to happen,
Yeah.
um, and ensure that it's been well thought out. Because yeah, like you said, if we're kind of initiating on a plan, we're executing on it, we've got some momentum, we really are close to some kind of an outcome that will be measurable, that'll have a result that at minimum we'll learn from and possibly the company will benefit from. So to get that close to that kind of a finish line and then to have to change course, it's very demoralizing.
Hmm.
So to understand the reasons and the criteria for evaluation that the leadership team has used to come to that conclusion, I think is helpful for getting teams to kind of buy in to that switch. Um, because what we don't want is for folks to feel like at any point the project that you've delegated to them to replace what they were working on is also going to get cut off in the next couple of months, and that hinders people's ability to get that same investment into the job.
Mm.
So yeah, I think it's a matter of not just saying this is our new priority, but due to XYZ factor that we now know, we need to put the brakes on this, and we think that XYZ next step is the next best case because just to kind of communicate, like there is a very good reason that we've measured in or some new information that's come about because it can be from an individual contributor's perspective, it can really come off as a shiny object syndrome
Yes.
symptom if
Hmm.
yeah, and that can erode trust in leadership as well.
100%. Yeah. That is I've been in those situations where you're like, oh, for all these reasons, this project that we were supportive of in the past,
Mhm.
we no longer think is a good use of resources. But we don't have a replacement project yet, like clearly defined. And so it's always a little bit awkward because you're like, well, do we just let them keep going
Mhm.
until we figure out the new thing? Or do we kind of embrace this ambiguity, but then people are gonna, that causes its own stress.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what do you think people would prefer? Would they prefer to just have another few months to kind of prove out the original hypothesis, even if there's generally a gathering consensus that it's not the way to go? Or would they prefer to kind of be told as soon as we know, even if we don't have the next thing for them to work on yet?
So this is a nuanced question, as
Yeah.
is every product team, right? I think it kind of depends on the kind of energy that's being put into the initiative in question. So, for example, if the team has already come to the conclusion that they're driving a car into a cliff,
Hmm.
um, it's probably not going to be a huge hard sell to say, you know what, we've learned enough. Let's pull the plug while we're still ahead. And a part of that too is how much of an investment are we really looking at? If it's an extremely costly project and to continue it to the point where it can be shipped and brought in front of users is much, much higher than any projection of what it's going to benefit the business for. Well, then yeah, maybe that's a stopping point. It's pretty clear. But if there is an opportunity still to recoup the cost of investment or potentially for it to be a bit of a sleeper hit,
Hmm.
um, and if the team is invested in it, if they feel that, there's a good thing coming out of this, everybody's kind of bought into the project, the energy level is very high. I generally think, and I'm really only speaking with my own experience here, but I generally think it is best to see that through because at the very minimum, the team has learned something from that skill set that is required to ship that they can apply to the next thing once you do decide what it's going to be. There's an outcome that you can measure that is often useful for comparing
Hmm.
or offers other data points that can be useful in future initiatives. There is potentially a better business outcome than expected. I've definitely seen that happen before. Our podcast is actually a really good example where we weren't sure how well it was going to do. We just kind of thought, well, we'll throw spaghetti at the wall, and it ended up growing really quickly. So there, sometimes these things can surprise you, and especially if it's being delivered by a team that's really invested in the outcome.
Yeah, I think there's merit to all of those arguments, and I think in practice I generally took that approach. I think in hindsight, I do wonder if leadership sometimes is avoiding conflict
Mm.
and saying, well, let's let them play it through. Maybe they might surprise us. Usually they didn't. Um, and like we don't want to piss everybody off. Or sometimes the worst things would happen, which is like, well, hold on, superstar PM is on this thing and they're up for promo, or they're gonna get really pissed and leave the company, leave the team, or something.
Mm.
And I think, at those times you're like, okay, I guess we'll keep our options open. But if you keep doing that, like it's a major tax on your agility, because
Yeah.
then you have all of these like long tail projects that that they do incur some opportunity cost, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. They incur some opportunity costs. And I think part of it is being measured with what do you commit to? You know,
Hmm.
like really being pretty structured in your approach to what is worth committing. Like when we say we're going to do something, we're going to take on an initiative. How well have we really evaluated the opportunity itself?
Hmm.
Um, how do we have the user research to back up that this is a worthy investment of our time? Does user research indicate, or does the research that we've done, or any prep work that we've done, indicate that this initiative is going to present value beyond the next couple of months when some other trend comes along? So I think part of it is being very careful with what you decide to take on, and still kind of leaving some room for projects that are a little bit more experimental in nature. Maybe you have a task force every now and then that's kind of dipping their toes into the water of should we pursue an AI feature? Let's get some research together and figure out whether or not this is like a good fit for our product. Um, so yeah, I think balance is kind of the key. It's kind of the theme of this.
Hmm.
And I think that's always the challenge, no matter what your organization is.
Yeah. There's another class of projects that are kind of wayward, or they, in hindsight, they turn out to be wayward, which is a highly influential executive on the leadership team has a hunch and they're really fired up about this feature or this product. And it is very comfortable to just go with that momentum, because you're like, oh, wow, if that person's supportive of it, you kind of get like uh clear they've cleared a path to execute.
Mhm.
um and then years later you look back and you're like, oh yeah, I remember we thought that thing was going to be the biggest win, and it was like a so what feature. And you do the retrospective and you're like, oh, that's because a big muckety muck was so enthusiastic about it, and we all just ran with it.
Yeah.
um and that can be frustrating and cause some fatigue for a team as well, right? When they're like on some holy war because so and so said this is going to be the next big thing, and either they don't believe it or they do believe it because they just assume that person is really right almost all the time.
Mhm.
What's your take on kind of the executive? At a big company it would be executive, at a small company it'd be the founders or co-founders, where they're just really pushing for something. And it's hard to push back because you're like, well, if it's a startup and it's the founder, it's like, well, they took the company this far. And if it's a big company and they're like a SVP or something, like they've shipped some winning features in the past.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I should hope that no matter what the level of leadership, that whether you are, C-suite at a big company or a founder of a smaller organization, that you would have the humility to know that even if you've made a lot of good decisions, not all of your decisions are inevitably going to be good. All of us make mistakes, all of us have lapses in judgment, and all of us, let's be real, in the product space and in business in general, we're always gambling. Everything is
Hmm.
a gamble until it hits the market. Um, so, it stands to reason that we should always no matter what level of leadership, be open to feedback. And I think that that really speaks to the real need. And I'm so heartened to see this, by the way, that this is happening more and more. Um, how businesses have become a little bit more flat. There is still obviously still the need for an org chart, but I
Hmm.
am really heartened to see that more and more corporate cultures are going towards this model of psychological safety and encouraging feedback all the way up the chain.
Hmm.
And I think that's so important to nurture that, because oftentimes I think the farther removed leadership is from individual contributors and folks who are executing on the things that leadership has planned, it can be difficult to see things clearly when we're kind of operating in more of a theoretical and tactical space than what the executors are really seeing, or those who are closer to customers. So I think it's really critical to really live and breathe, demonstrate um, that psychological safety and that need for a feedback loop. Because if it's not present, um, it makes it really difficult to hear those frustrations or hear some of the possibly very real and very valid concerns that teams are going to have. Um, because a lot of folks kind of tend to pay a little bit lip service, or they kind of keep their frustrations to themselves when facing a leader, but then they just grumble them to the person in the cubicle next door, and we don't want that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, maybe we could shift gears a little bit and now talk about, if you are, let's start with an ICPM and then we'll talk about leadership. But if you're an ICPM on a team and you're feeling like you're getting yanked this way and that way, and there's like a new direction period, very regularly, such that you're getting frustrated and you don't feel like you're being set up to succeed, what do you think they can do when they find themselves in that situation for the ICPMs?
I think that relationship building is so critical in a situation like this, and in the lead up to it too. And I would really advise any ICPM listening to start investing heavily in the relationship building skills with everybody, all the stakeholders that you touch and communicate with before you have an issue to bring to their attention. Because it's through that kind of relationship building when things are good and when things are not in crisis, or when you're not frustrated, you kind of build that sense of trust, you build that sense of rapport. You can kind of communicate that, hey, like I might be an ICPM, but I also have a really good perspective and I'm invested in the success of the business, and I'm invested in the success of the team. Proving those things early on gets you a lot more influence when things get a little bit more challenging, where you have to push back, because at that point, at the point that you've pushed back, or you need to push back, when you have a track record of being pretty on board, um, people take it a lot more seriously and don't kind of flag you as a complainer, because they know you and they know your intentions.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll build on that and say that if you're an ICPM and you want to invest more in that trust and that relationship with some of the leadership, one way to do it is to try and be as kind of dispassionate a problem solver as you can. So,
Mhm.
like, if you're on a project and let's say you think that it deserves more runway and you sense that leadership is kind of losing interest in it, it's better to say, hey, I wanted to share with you my assumptions about why I think this project could be successful,
Mhm.
and some of the data that I'm seeing, either in the market or from customers or from usage, that make me believe that this is something we should actually invest more in.
Mhm.
And maybe as a product leader, I might not agree, but at least I feel like, okay, I've got a constructive thought partner here and we can figure this out. Maybe we disagree on some of the assumptions, but at least we have some logic and some kind of overarching way to figure this out. And
Yeah.
that builds a lot of trust.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that that's kind of an important distinction to make too. When I say pushback, I don't mean, just come to them with a host of complaints and
Mhm.
cry your eyes out. I mean, when we're pushing back, those kinds of conversations should be really evidence based. We should really be coming prepared to offer some pretty concise data points for why exactly we think that what's being deprioritized shouldn't be deprioritized, what's being pursued. If we disagree with that, maybe should go in a different direction. If we need to challenge leadership, it's yeah, you kind of got to put your data where where your mouth is. I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it also works in the reverse scenario where, let's say, leadership is really excited about something and you're not.
Mhm.
Um, One way that I've seen people react in those situations, which I don't think is super effective, is they'll kind of go into rolling of the eyes, or like, some commentary, in the hallway, but in the actual meetings, like not voice themselves. And
Oh
that doesn't that's probably not good for anybody.
no, that is a disease right there.
um I think the other approach of like, hey, I understand this project is getting a lot of resources and I'm excited to be on it. I'm trying to better understand
Mm.
the strategic bets we're making. And here's what I'm seeing. I'm in terms of data or customer feedback or what I see in the market. Maybe I'm missing something. Can you help me understand like why we think this is going to be a 10x bigger thing, a few years from now? And even if I, as a leader, hear that, I can sense like they're a little skeptical. Like I'm like, okay, like number one, this is a helpful exercise for all of us. Like we should always retest our assumptions. And number two is like, well, maybe this person can help me identify a blind spot and make this project even more successful. And that's just like a really positive way to disagree. And because at the end of the day, like we all want the project to be successful.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more, and I appreciate what you mentioned also about, kind of the grumbling, like, what I mentioned was a disease. I
Mm,
cannot stress enough from my own experience, if you're an ICPM listening to this, avoid the temptation to keep your negative thoughts to yourself when you're talking to leadership and just pass them on to a fellow individual contributor or a fellow team member. It's never a good time. It's never going to result in positive outcomes. That kind of grumbling it might feel good in the moment to kind of release those frustrations, but it so erodes the morale of the team,
mm,
and it really transforms the dynamic from a partnership between leadership and ICs and the teams that are working with them, and turns it into more of an us versus them. And there's just nothing good to come of that. You can't be successful at changing the direction and making it, an initiative that everyone is going to be excited about. If you choose to take things inward and start to erode the morale of the team. So please learn from my mistakes. I've been this person before. It's not good for your career. It's not good for the folks around you, and it's definitely not good for the business.
yeah, I totally agree. And I think even in those cases where, let's say, a few levels above you in the food chain, maybe you're right. Maybe they really are clueless. Then it's your opportunity to help them.
Mhm.
It's your opportunity to manage up and take the high road and help come up with a solution that everybody can be excited about, that's better. If you take the other approach of just kind of like, us versus them, like you were saying, like that for sure is not going to result in the project being more successful.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, like we all succeed or fail together. So we might as well figure it out as a group. And, even if I'm sure there are plenty of times where leadership does things that, are very frustrating and are kind of, you're befuddled. But I will say, having been on the other side of it, there's sometimes things that you don't have full visibility into
Mhm.
that if you were in their shoes, you would know it wouldn't be as crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there are plenty of times where, yeah, leadership just screwed up, but there are a lot of times where it's like, look, we're kind of from our leadership getting clear guidance, and there are guardrails being provided to us. And so, we don't have as much flexibility as you might think we have.
Mhm.
And so there's always like everybody always works for someone.
Right, right, and that just comes right back to what we mentioned in the beginning about, trust and how
Yeah.
important that trust is to foster early and often, because, the better and stronger the relationships are between, teams and leadership, the more effective everyone can be, and the easier it is to gain buy-in at any level.
Well, look at that. 30 minutes came and went. What a fun topic, Hannah. Thank you for suggesting it.
Oh, my
Um,
pleasure.
why don't we wrap with two things? One is what's a specific thing a PM that's listening to this can do if they're in the situation that we're talking about, um, where they're kind of frustrated with leadership kind of changing their minds or changing priorities or changing decisions on resources. What can they do tomorrow to try and find a win-win?
Well, I would say the first thing to look at is, do you feel that you have the relationship with that leader
Hmm.
to address that with them? Because if you don't, it means that there is some relationship building that you need to do, and that should be your first priority. Uh, how do you nurture the relationship without coming to them directly with, just an attack or a complaint about what's happening, or your observation of the patterns that you're noticing? Um, First, start with building a relationship, building rapport, building trust, showing that you do have a handle on and are invested in the success of the team. And then from there, once you feel that that rapport has been established, then, like we mentioned, you can present some evidence-based arguments for, why you think that there's a pattern that is not helpful for the outcomes of the business, or et cetera, whatever those frustrations may be. But it really, really has to start with establishing a really strong relationship and rapport, and that will just help you as a PM throughout your career. Um, yeah, I guess that would be my number one advice.
Yeah, I love it. It's all about relationships and trust for sure. Um, we can wrap with remind everyone how they can stay connected with you and learn more about what you're doing.
Sure. Well, you can visit us at theproductmanager.com. We've got tons of resources. We publish all the time with just advice and guides and all kinds of stuff for PMs looking to level up their game. You can also check us out on the Product Manager podcast. So theproductmanager.com/podcasts, or you can find us anywhere where you get your podcasts. And we have lots of conversations with folks in the space at all levels. We are really focused on, what's the audience going to benefit from as far as this conversation is concerned. So lots of fun stuff there. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn. You can search Hannah Clark, the product manager. I should pop up. I'm pretty responsive on my DMs.
Love it. Well, thanks again, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show in the future. And I think I might surface on your podcast down the road as well. So look forward to that. When it comes.
Yeah, look forward to having you on. And thanks so much for having me.
You bet, Hannah.